I am about to create new heavens and a new earth. The former things shall not be remembered or come to mind. From Isaiah. So what does marriage mean? And did any of you know that's what I was going to talk about? The night before Bernie invited me to preach on the topic of marriage, just a few days after Gary, Berger, and I were legally married here in Maplewood, we had gone with longtime friends to see the film Watchda, which came and went pretty quickly in Maplewood, but I'm glad we caught it. This film, the first ever directed by a Saudi woman, is ostensibly about the quest of a preteen girl to own a bicycle, something frowned upon in Saudi society. But what it really is about is the position of all women in modern Saudi society. Wajda's mother, an educated upper-middle-class school teacher, is verbally abused by the driver hired by her husband to chauffeur her to her job, because Saudi women cannot drive, something that's been in the news recently. She resists her rebellious daughter's desire to ride a bicycle, right up to the point when she loses her own husband to a second wife and a second family because she cannot bear him a son. She cannot divorce him and will never be able to remarry, and if she has an affair outside of her marriage and is caught, she can be sentenced to death. This is today in Saudi Arabia. At the age of 35, this woman's life is essentially over. What I took away from that film in the wake of my own marriage on 10/21 was that for Saudi women, marriage is simply another, more profound expression of their inferior status and helplessness. Indeed, there is an uncomfortable parallel between modern Saudi marriage and the marriage that, as it is represented in the Bible from which we read every Sunday in this church. Traditional Judeo-Christian marriage is not about love and commitment. It's about ownership and control, about blood ties and tribal lines. So to this bleak insight, I offer an interesting counterpoint from an unexpected source. During my 10-day sojourn in Israel in October this year, I was granted a remarkable opportunity to learn something of the true complexity of modern Israeli society. One thing I gleaned from my visit is that we really don't hear the full story from any news source here in the United States, not by a long shot. But the single fact, that startled me most during my stay in Tel Aviv is that there are no civil marriages allowed in Israel. In that once socialist nation, the land of kibbutzim and the home of required military service for all women before college, marriages may only be performed by Orthodox rabbis in synagogues. All divorces, there is no state marriage. And Reform rabbis, and there were plenty of Reform synagogues, have no standing in the state and may not perform weddings of any sort. All divorces are adjudicated in Orthodox Jewish divorce courts. In a country where 80% of the population, 80%, defines itself as non-religious, there is no separation of church and state at all. The result is that young people live together and raise families without getting married, or they go to Cyprus to get married in a civil ceremony, which is not recognized under Israeli law. So, while I was away studying contemporary art and pondering religious inconsistencies in the Holy Land, my partner of 38 years decided that it was essential that we get legally married on the first day possible under the new New Jersey law. And I tell you, this is without question the most romantic thing he has ever done. We were, in fact, the third couple to get married in Maplewood and the first male couple. And also, let me add how touched I was that a whole little gang of St. Georgians showed up along with volunteers from the Newark Museum and just random friends, including friends of my children, and boosted us as we went through this brief ceremony. And I have to also thank Nina, who seems to be filming me right now, for bragging about it all over Facebook. St. George's rules. Brothers and sisters, do not be weary in doing what is right, from St. Paul's letter to the Thessalonians. You all must realize that when Gary and I moved to Maplewood in 1980, we were aged 25 and 26, respectively. Marriage was not on our radar, not even remotely. It was an idea inconceivable to us. In 1980, gay folk in New Jersey were still fighting a movement within the legislature to recriminalize homosexual behavior. Almost everywhere in the country, we could still be fired just for being gay. It's still true in a larger part of the country than we like to acknowledge. And at that time, we were routinely denied fundamental access to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness that most Americans assume is their birthright. Marriage was not on the back burner. It was not even on the stove. That was just the way things were. Now, back in 1985, for our 10th anniversary, before I joined St. George's, we exchanged gold rings that we had purchased from a shop on Christopher Street in Greenwich Village. Back then, this seemed a daring and in-your-face sort of expression of our relationship, something that very few people did. And it did indeed force us into many awkward conversations over the next decades about the wives people assumed we had because we wore wedding rings. Although we were legally bound to each other by the mortgage on our house, and only by the mortgage on our house, which we paid off, by the way, the rings seemed like a much more potent symbol to us. In 2000, at 25 years, we upgraded those rings to bands of gold inlaid with platinum, having had to have the old ones cut off our mysteriously fat fingers in the presence of a curious group of onlookers at a jewelry store in Millburg. But far more than any material symbols, the most powerful thing that has happened to us was the placement of both of our names as parents on the birth certificates of our children, Alex and Grace. Gary had to adopt them twice before I could try to adopt them once. Back then, second parent adoption was a risky business and there was no guarantee of success, but we had no choice, and fortunately, it worked. Back then, regardless of our marital status, which was, by the way, single, in spite of 20 years together and 2 children, we were forever bound, irrevocably bound, far more than by marriage, I might say, by those 2 tiny, demanding creatures who altered the course of our life in 1996. And by the way, they were both baptized right here at St. George's. Not that many of you have ever seen them, but... Physical symbols, however, are ephemeral. Gary lost his 25th anniversary band playing in the sand with the kids at the Jersey Shore in 2001. And the unwritten line here, because I knew he was going to read this, is that he's actually lost every piece of jewelry I've ever given him, so I wasn't surprised. And it didn't bother me, because a ring is a ring. It's a symbol, but it's just a thing. When it came time to have our civil union performed by a judge in 2007, after 32 years and 11 years as parents, we had Gary's old ring resized and repaired, along with the ring I already wear, and exchanged them in our living room in front of the fireplace as our families and our friends looked on. That was pretty great, saying vows to each other for the first time aloud in front of witnesses. But we still weren't married. The judge was legally forbidden from using the word marriage at all and said so as part of the service. He said so to express his disapproval of that discrepancy. So now we have 5 anniversaries. October 14, 1975, which is the day we met at Yale. December 31st, that same year, which was the night we first declared our love for each other. July 10th, what year I forget, the day we got our domestic partnership. April 28th, our civil union, which was the day after Ulysses S. Grant's birthday, so I always remember that. And now, October 21st, when we were legally married by Mayor DeLuca right here in Town Hall. And to be honest, I can tell you that New Year's Eve will remain our real anniversary for all the rest of our lives, as it has been so far, because it was at that moment that, in the face of all the hurdles that we knew stood before us, before our parents even knew we were a couple, we decided to cast our lots with each other forever. For richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. We didn't say those things out loud to each other, but we thought them and we felt them, and we didn't need a ceremony to know what we wanted. Which is not to say that the events of October 21st, 2013 are not enormously important to both of us. All along, the naysayers to same-sex marriage have invoked the notion that civil union was just as good as marriage, only without those words, as if the words made no difference. Theoretically, we still had all the rights that real married people had, and this premise, of course, as it turned out, wasn't really true, not because of any legal weakness, but because people throughout the state who were not quite on the same page simply didn't believe that the term civil union was equal to marriage and therefore would not give people the rights they actually legally had. And who wants to fight that every day of your life? Beyond the legal ramifications of this disbelief, it just didn't feel equal to us. In spite of the nice term civil union and the certificate that we still have in a file in our office, it didn't feel the same. And as you all may remember, the whole separate but equal gambit has been tried historically in this country with similar success. You will be betrayed even by parents and brothers, by relatives and friends, and they will put some of you to death. You will be hated by all because of my name. But not a hair of your head will perish. By your endurance you will gain your souls. That's from Luke. It is not just semantics. The words matter. Having Vic DeLuca tell us to repeat the words, "I take you as my husband," to each other, and hearing him announce that we were married under the laws of New Jersey, and by the way, on the certificate it says under the laws of God, which I'm not sure is actually legal on a state document, but it was not insignificant. Those words matter. Back in July, Gary and I attended a wedding of two friends of ours on Boston's North Shore, both young men, young enough to be our sons. Of the 80 guests at the wedding, Gary and I were the only gay couple of the same generation as the groom's mother and father. I tried not to focus on this and how old it made me feel, but on the reason that Michael and Daniel had invited us to their wedding. They had asked me to speak the night before the wedding at the rehearsal dinner, and this is on the North Shore of Boston looking south at the city skyline. As the two of them prepared, standing on the beach, to throw a bottle into the waves, a bottle in which they had placed a scroll inscribed with all their hopes and dreams for their marriage. We stood there in the dark with a group of little sort of bright blue tin lanterns flickering with candlelight. As I said to them and their friends and family in the twilight on the beach that night, we see Daniel and Michael as we were 30 years ago, and they see us as what they hope they'll be 30 years from now. We were very flattered by that, even though we were still not legally married at that point. But we helped them celebrate an event that at their age, we could not have imagined possible. I confess, I did cry at that wedding, as I am wont to do in any case, but for my own personal reasons. Marriage is more than just an event. It is a validation by society of who you are as an individual, as a couple, as a family. I love that Bernie has repeatedly offered to perform same-gender weddings here at St. George's, and I want him to understand how touched I am by this wish to do so. And I hope plenty of folks will take advantage of this offer. And I know we have Cheryl and Sharon doing it next Sunday at 10 o'clock, and you're all invited, by the way. But Gary and I needed to get married in town hall by the mayor. We needed that secular, civic validation. In some ways, it's the surprising culmination for us of everything we have worked for and the lives we have lived as members of the first post-Stonewall generation. St. George's validated my relationship the moment I walked through the door 27 years ago on Palm Sunday at Craig Burlington's invitation. I may value separation of church and state, but I'm endlessly grateful now that both my church and my state recognize the truth of my marriage. St. George's should be awesomely proud that it was on the right side of history long before it was the thing to do. Sing to the Lord a new song, for he has done marvelous things. In righteousness shall he judge the world and the peoples with equity. Psalm 98.